ChoralEd. Welcome to the ChoralEd YouTube channel. I'm your host, Micah Bland. Thanks so much for watching. Today, in part 2 of episode 3, we're continuing our discussion of classroom management. If you recall, last month in part 1 of episode 3, we covered the topic of proactive classroom management techniques. The idea that we try to prevent and minimize misbehavior before it ever occurs. Now, as teachers, I'm sure we wish that this were the case, that we could prevent all misbehavior from ever happening, but anyone who spent an hour, probably not even that much, in a classroom knows that we can't prevent every misbehavior from happening, and we have to at times react to behavior that is occurring in the classroom. Which brings us to this part 2 as we discuss discipline and reacting to misbehavior in the classroom. To begin, there are some general ideas and concepts I want to present. The first is closely related to your teacher identity, that your personal approach to teaching and your personal identity and your character that you exhibit can really influence the method of classroom management that you choose. For example, if you're more calm, patient, and kind, you might want to consider, and I strongly suggest that you consider, the love and logic approach. Now, many of the techniques that you'll use are pretty similar, but there are some differences as to how you respond to misbehavior, how you speak to students. And so again, if your character is a little different and you have more of a patient, calm, and kind demeanor, I strongly urge you to consider and look into that love and logic approach. The second general idea is this idea of consistency, that when misbehavior occurs, you need to be very consistent in how you respond to that behavior. Both the consequence that you deliver and being consistent in always correcting that behavior when it occurs. If you allow the students to start talking without raising their hand or asking questions without raising their hand, and that's an expectation in your class, if you start to allow that and not consistent in enforcing that expected behavior, then students can start taking advantage and it becomes less of a requirement and they just think it's kind of like hit or miss. The other issue with that is if you're not consistent in correcting that and giving consequences for that misbehavior in your classroom, then students can start to feel that there is a discrepancy in equality in the classroom, that, well, one day Susie didn't raise her hand and now next day Johnny didn't raise his hand and he gets in trouble, right? And so there's this inequality in fairness of, well, why does Johnny get in trouble and Susie not? And this creates an even bigger problem and a bigger concern that you might need to face if you are not being consistent in delivering consequences or equitable consequences. You know, perhaps one instance, Johnny leaves the risers and he gets just a warning, and Susie leaves the risers and she gets an office referral, right? That doesn't add up. And so being consistent in your consequences that you deliver, as well as consistent in continuously responding to misbehavior in the class. The third general aspect is that of keeping a record of misbehavior in the classroom. This can be a very supportive avenue for you when it comes to having to go to office referrals or more problematic issues, as well as it keeps track of, you don't lose track of, oh, well, did we have a detention last time, or did we have a parent phone call? What stage are we on as far as the consequences that need to be enforced? And so some schools will have you complete this record of misbehavior digitally on a digital platform, which is great. If they don't, you can create your own digital platform, but I personally preferred a paper handout because what I had is each student had one page And on that page was a table with the different consequences that would occur. It also had, a description. We would describe the misbehavior, write it in. And most importantly, I think, is the student initialed. So they're kind of recognizing this is the consequence that will occur. I will have a detention this time. They recognize that, and it gives more credence to them owning up to their mistakes instead of just a digital input that they have no real connection to. Now, the key component of having this record and what is beneficial here is when you have to get to the point of an office referral, I would always make a copy of that page that I had outlining all the steps I've taken so far. And so when you write an office referral and I staple that, then copy it and staple that to the referral. So when that goes to the office, they see that, okay, this is not just a one-time occurrence. This is there are multiple issues here happening continuously for this student. And it gives more precedent to the referral than just, oh, he must not like this student, or they don't know the full story, right? And here they can get more of a full picture of the issues that are happening with this specific student. And then they can deliver a more impactful consequence for that student when that office referral is taking place. So those are the kind of the three general ideas I want to start off with. Now there's some more specific techniques that we can use. And the first is kind of this idea of a warning. Well, what is a warning, right? And so in my mind, warnings kind of have this this approach during the classroom where you provide them with either your approach is proximity or a verbal command or the teacher look. So those are kind of the first stages of correcting behavior in the classroom. Proximity is where you as a teacher move closer to a student who is misbehaving. Usually for most students, perhaps maybe they're on their phone, texting, if you move towards them, they get the idea of, oh, I'm going to be caught, I'm going to get in trouble, let me put it away. Or they're talking, you move towards them, oh, I know I'm doing the wrong thing, let me correct this behavior. It gives this kind of mental clue that, oh, I need to fix this behavior. Several students will respond to that. Some might not, and might need other more forceful corrections, right? So that first stage is proximity. The next is this idea of the teacher look. And if you are stuck behind the piano for whatever reason and you can't use proximity, I strongly encourage you to get away from the piano as much as possible so you can use that proximity technique. But the teacher look is also a very effective tool. And this is a visual signal that says, I see you, I see that behavior you're doing, and you need to stop that behavior immediately. It needs to be a little intimidating, it needs to be a little intense. Those familiar with the great classic TV show from the 1990s, Home Improvement, might remember this great episode where wives gave their husbands the look. And so check out this clip from Home Improvement.
Look out, guys, here it comes.
I think that's a great clip. So unlike that clip, which the look is a little more menacing, you probably don't want to be as threatening and menacing. But the look you give these students should be intense. Usually what you do is you tilt the head down, you purse the lips, eyes are big, there's an intensity behind the eyes that say, I see what you're doing, that behavior is inappropriate, and you need to stop. This gives a little intimidation to the student, a little fear to the student of, oh, I need to stop what I'm doing. Something is about to happen, right? There's going to be a consequence. Sometimes a head shake no. But that teacher look can be very effective. The next stage, if that look doesn't work And if that proximity doesn't work, then you need to provide a verbal command. It's important that this verbal command is not a question. I said a command because it needs to be a statement. It shouldn't be, why aren't you on the risers? Where's your pencil? What are you doing? These are all questions, and all these questions you probably don't want the answer to, right? Oh, well, you know, my teacher held me late and this and that, right? It needs to be a authoritative command. Johnny, I need you to sit down. Johnny, I need you to stop talking. I'm picking on Johnny today. Sorry about that. Sorry if your name is Johnny out there. So it needs to be an authoritative command. Now, when you say, will you sit down? Or you say, please, the inflection of that please going up, or the phrase will you, is asking a question. Johnny, will you stop talking, please? Or Johnny, stop talking, please? That please, the inflection going up, asks a question. Instead, the inflection needs to go down in your voice. Johnny, stop talking, please. Or Johnny, please stop talking. If you want to include please in there. Probably don't put please in the end. It's a habit to inflect it up with a question. It's also important to use the student's name. Susie, I need you on the risers. This is in contrast to saying, soprano, stop talking. Basses, get on the risers. There are going to be several students who are behaving correctly, who are then grouped into the sopranos who are talking. Now, a few times this isn't a problem, but if it happens over and over again where you are generalizing the whole section, those well-behaved students start to have some resentment towards those students who are always talking, right? And then that creates this atmosphere of, oh, I'm getting in trouble because they're always talking, and then there's this disjoint in the section, which is an atmosphere you really don't want to have. Along the lines also with your teacher speech, the teacher voice, some people call it, is to talk slowly and clearly and articulate. Jonathan, I need you to sit down. Jonathan, sit down, right? Or sit down, what are you doing? Not using a name, not talking slow. It's just kind of just a jumbled mess, right? There's lacks intensity and clarity there. Lacks authority. Now, the opposite side of a verbal command, and I strongly encourage you to use as much as you can, is this is called positive narration. I almost forgot the name of it there. Positive narration. That you see someone doing correct behavior, demonstrating appropriate behavior, and you comment on that. Susie, thanks so much for doing your hand signs during that solfege. Can we all imitate Susie and how she's doing her hand signs? This is instead of going, Jonathan, why aren't you doing your hand signs? Right? This is a positive way of giving corrective feedback to a student. It implies what they should be doing, right? Now, many students will get the idea, or they want that praise, and so they will correct their behavior. You know, Jonathan, thank you so much for raising your hand. It tells the other students, oh, I was supposed to be raising my hand. And this is opposed to being always negative, which kind of just brings a downer to the atmosphere of the classroom. When these techniques of proximity, the look, and verbal commands aren't working, or you are having to employ them for the same student several times over and over again on a daily basis throughout the week, it's time to move on to other consequences. The first being a student-teacher conference. Now, in my opinion, this is a developed skill, your technique of talking with the student. It's very much a developed skill that you develop over the years of doing this. Learning how to do it, right off the bat, is a little difficult in my opinion. But you can try. So it needs to be that it doesn't need to be a lecture where you just talk with them and say, you need to fix this, you're misbehaving all the time, you need to be way better than this. But that lecture doesn't really have an impact, in my opinion. What it needs to have is a little bit of empathy with the student, but making them realize that their behavior is not appropriate, and making them and allowing them to own up to their mistakes. Sometimes they want to give excuses. Oh, it was Susie talking to me. It was this other person. They started it. Having them own up to their own actions so they realize this behavior is not appropriate. If after that stage behavior still continues to happen, misbehavior continues to happen, the next step that many teachers often skip is detention. Now, some detention in some schools will be established by the school, that they have a set time after school or during lunch where you can assign a student to detention. That's great. But the reason many teachers skip detention is because it's very difficult to have a student come in after school, before school, for a 30-minute detention or longer, however long you want to have your detention. That's understandable because they have sports, they have a bus to catch, and so getting them to come in just creates more of a hassle than it's worth sometimes. So what I do instead, and I encourage you to use this technique, is to have a 5-minute detention. Now you might think that's a pretty short time, which it is, which is great for you, but the important thing here is what the student is doing during the detention, right? So they can easily come before school, usually they're there 15 minutes early, 10 minutes early, unless they're consistently late. Maybe tardy is the issue that you're having. That's another issue, right? But coming in for lunch is very easy. So the important thing is what they're doing, and what I have them do is practice self-control. Usually the reason they're having detention is because they can't control themselves in class. They push somebody else, they're talking, they can't control things, right? So I have them place their hands on a table, on a desk. Every time they want to take their hands off that desk, or anytime they want to talk, stand up, whatever else, I add 30 seconds to their time. So they start at 5 minutes, but they could get to 6-7 minutes if they continually demonstrate that they don't have self-control. This technique I find is very effective because most students 5 minutes, 5.5, 6 minutes, and they're done. And so after that time, then you can talk with them and say, you just now clearly demonstrated that you have self-control, and I expect to see that self-control in the classroom. After detention comes the parent phone call. I know starting out as a beginning teacher, I felt a little awkward about making a phone call. Be confident about it, be prepared, know what you're going to say. But the important technique here is that you have the student present and you have the student describe the misbehavior to their parent. Students very much dislike having to do this. They're kind of getting away with things when their parent is not here, they're misbehaving, and their parent doesn't know really what's going on in the classroom as far as their misbehavior. And so them having to fess up to it has this kind of accountability factor that their parent now knows what is going on in the classroom, and they have to tell their parent that misbehavior. Now, when you do this, it's important to kind of talk with the student first and let them know and have them kind of practice what they're going to say. Because if you don't, you hand them the phone to tell their parent what's going on, they say, what am I supposed to tell them? I don't know, right? I've made that mistake a couple times before where they don't really, and then I have to coach them through it while they're on the phone with their parent, right? You can also do this as a voicemail, right? So that also helps. And then say, if you have any questions, feel free to give me a call back. When you have a documented instances of behavior, it's important to kind of tell this parent, we've already had a detention, we already had a conference, unfortunately these behaviors are still happening. It gives a little more precedence to the reason for the phone call, not just this is a one-time thing, right? Like same thing as the providing that for the office referral, your response and consequences you've already delivered. So it's very helpful to you. After the parent phone call, there's different stages. Some people do a parent-teacher conference. Then, of course, the final stage is an office referral. Hopefully, you don't have to use these techniques. Oh, I forgot one other technique that I want to share with you, and that is the sit and stew technique. And all these behavioral issues that you need to deliver a consequence for, it's best not to really stop class and say, let's make a parent phone call, or, you know, let's go talk, let's have our conference now. That doesn't work. So what you do instead is have them sit and stew. You say something along the lines of, I found that behavior very inappropriate, and we're going to talk at the end of class. The phrase, we're going to talk at the end of class, is very important there, because now they know I messed up, I'm in trouble, and there are consequences coming. And so they usually will kind of sit back and kind of pout and be upset. They're going to sit and stew, which is fine with me, right? Sometimes, if it's distracting to the other students, have them sit and stew in your office, off to the side. That works as well. But anyways, to conclude, I hope you don't have to use these techniques very often. I hope your preventative and proactive techniques are very effective. But there are additional techniques that you can implement. Unfortunately, we don't really have time to discuss all the different approaches. And so as I asked in part 1, I asked for you to send in videos. I'm going to adapt that a little bit. Being a teacher, it's important to be adaptable. It's a little early in our YouTube channel to be asking for videos. And so instead, I would ask that you comment on this YouTube video as well as part 1 and share your insights into classroom management techniques that you found very effective and that work for you. And whether that's a month or 2-3 years from now, I'd love for you to comment and share, and so others from the ChoralEd community can use your techniques and help develop that community here with ChoralEd. So as always, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you continue to inspire the future leaders of our world through this wonderful gift we call music. Thanks.